The issue isn't that half of marriages conclude in divorce. It's that most are long since deceased, yet no one dares to enter them. They share a bed, but exist separately. They trace their fingers over a screen as the other breathes mere centimeters distant, like a phantom with a name. They split a home, a bed, a mortgage, but they no longer split a glance. Good night is still said, but the phrase doesn't mean I love you anymore. It means we're maintaining the pretense. Contemporary love is now a stage play lacking spectators, a performance reenacted daily with identical actors, identical lines, and an applause that never arrives. Nietzsche cautioned of this over a century prior, labeling romantic love as humanity's most ruinous falsehood. He stated that men marry not from love, but from dread. Dread of solitude. Dread of confronting himself with no observer. And he was correct, as no hell is more quiet than that shared by two who no longer desire one another, yet stay together just to avoid admitting the desire is gone. Marriage doesn't perish with shouting, it perishes with silence. It perishes when caresses become routine, when a kiss turns to procedure, when love shifts into an obligation with a set expiry. And as everyone searches for a culprit, none dare concede the most awkward fact. The love that pledged eternity was merely a transient chemical state, a fever we misidentified as destiny. Romanticism made it a religion. Society made it a contract, yet Nietzsche named it accurately, a cultured type of insanity. So prior to discussing divorce, let us gaze straight at the actual cause of death. It was not love's absence, but mystery's demise. Humans cannot tolerate ambiguity, which is why romantic love was devised, a concept as lovely as it is operationally untrue. Nietzsche grasped something with a lucidity that presently horrifies neuroscientists. What's termed eternal love is merely a chemical tempest with a due date. Dopamine, the opiate of pursuit, convinces you that meaning is found in another. Oxytocin fastens you via tenderness, while serotonin provides just enough tranquility to confuse pleasure with purpose. These chemicals, however, were not designed to endure, but just to secure reproduction and the primary bond. Following that, like any narcotic, the brain pursues equilibrium, and the flames recede. What's left isn't love, but emotional retraction, a biological side effect we cloak as routine. Nietzsche termed it the will to power masked as love, humanity's frantic effort to find completion via someone else. We don't genuinely love the other. We utilize them to flee from ourselves. This is why, as the intensity wanes, as mystery ceases to be, the connection fails. What is left is an emptiness so recognizable we misinterpret it as maturity. The reality, however, is far more savage. We don't mature. We adjust. We tame ourselves to uphold the falsehood of steady love. Contemporary neuroscience verifies this. Helen Fisher from Rutgers University found the infatuation stage endures for 18 to 24 months. Following this, the brain curtails its dopamine output, delight wanes, and what was previously a volcano of desire turns to sterile land. This is where the tragedy commences. We mistake chemistry for the soul. We think quietness is mature love, when it is actually emotional disengagement. Marriage as an institution was founded on that biological self-delusion. We require a transient state to uphold perpetual vows, and when biology finishes its cycle, as it invariably does, we label it failure. Nietzsche perceived this long before others. He thus wrote that love isn't a holy state, but a fleeting insanity. It's nature's ideal snare, making you think you are selecting when, in fact, your chemistry is selecting you. And should you still think what you feel is true love, just wait for the tempest to pass, since what endures beyond desire is not invariably love. At times, it is just the dread of conceding that forever was never real. To fall in love is no decision. It is a neurological takeover. When you're attracted to someone you aren't choosing, your brain shuts down the frontal lobe, the region tasked with rational assessment, and unleashes a tempest of dopamine, norepinephrine, and phenylethylamine, the very chemicals flooding an addict during their initial heroin hit. This is why love isn't just felt, it is withstood. The heart pounds, the palms perspire, the mind finds no peace. Each text, each look, each quiet moment becomes a dopaminergic reward. You grow intoxicated with the concept of the other. Nietzsche grasped this long before there were brain scans. He designated this state a necessary madness. Necessary as it guarantees the species' survival. Madness as it warps reality so much it makes an average individual the nexus of your symbolic world. Modern neuroscience terms it limerence, an obsessive condition where the brain mistakes dopamine for destiny. In this phase, the reward system turns into a servant of uncertainty. Love flourishes not by presence, but by query. That's why the other's quietude becomes more activating than their warmth. The brain, akin to a gambler at a roulette wheel, is more excited by the prospect of victory than by the assurance of having won. Romantic love thrives on that exact tension, the longing for the ungraspable. A 2005 Harvard University study confirmed this. The more ambiguous the other's emotional feedback, the higher the dopaminergic system's activation. Ambiguity, that heady blend of delight and anxiety, is the hidden fuel for human desire. Nietzsche would have framed it differently. We don't love the person. We love the sensation of vitality their presence provides. This is why, when the other at last reciprocates entirely, the chemical tempest starts to wane. Dopamine subsides, the obsession abates, and what was once inferno slowly cools to custom. Love ceases its madness and morphs into a compact. And it is there the suffering starts, silently, almost imperceptibly. Because the human psyche isn't built for emotional stasis, but for the ceaseless chase of intensity. When that intensity subsides, the relationship starts to perish in the most silent manner imaginable, through acclimatization. The chemistry has served its function, the biological impulse has run its course, and what's left is a choice we must learn to maintain without dopamine, to love without the high of infatuation. Nietzsche named it the test of the free soul. The instant you learn if you truly love the person, or are just addicted to the feeling of needing them. Most individuals don't see when love perishes. There's no bang, no wailing, no blood on the tiles, just a gradual fading, a sort of emotional corrosion that commences once mystery vanishes. It all begins with one thought nobody dares voice: I'm no longer excited. And while it appears trivial, that thought signals the start of the end. Nietzsche warned with brutal lucidity, love, in promising eternity, is already deceiving. As the initial chemistry wanes, the brain hunts for new stimulation sources, but most try to reanimate passion's corpse using the very venom that slew it. Routine. Dinners, anniversaries, hollow pledges, rituals created not to feel, but to recall that they once felt. Love then shifts into a museum, a venue where memories that no longer breathe are exhibited. Neuroscience confirms this. Post-dopaminergic phase, the brain engages regions tied to habit and security, supplanting excitement with belonging. But desire doesn't grasp security. Desire requires risk, and when risk vanishes, desire perishes. This is why so many pairs start resembling two actors reading lines from a script they no longer credit. The man who was once inferno now measures, analyzes, tempers. The woman who was once an enigma now foresees every word, and both unknowingly become lesser versions of themselves. Nietzsche labeled this the domestication of the will, the method by which two people, fearing to lose the bond, surrender the very powers that once made them desire one another. He is no longer free, she is no longer a puzzle, and united, they erect the very prison they term stability. Psychology terms it affective dissonance. maintaining the performance of a relationship when the feeling that supported it is gone. Externally, it resembles mature love. Internally, it is a gradual death masked as loyalty. The body is aware before the mind is. The skin ceases to react the same. The kiss no longer sparks anything. The other's voice fades to ambient sound. And yet they remain, not from desire, but from dread. Dread of shattering the image they fashioned, dread of going back to loneliness, dread of conceding that what they possessed was never eternal, merely chemical. Nietzsche would state it plainly. Marriage doesn't collapse when love ceases. It collapses when habit starts. And herein lies the most bitter paradox. The very love that was once a liberating force evolves into the machine that constructs your servitude. You become a vassal to the idea of love, to what others perceive as happiness, to the narrative you once crafted and now cannot figure out how to conclude. Thus, marriages don't perish from infidelity or from a lack of love. They perish from asphyxiation, from a surplus of certainty, from the forfeiture of that vertigo which once rendered the other a mystery, not a chore. Passion isn't erased by time. It's erased by the fear of losing what is already gone. And when that occurs, the bond is no longer a union, it becomes a contract. A cage with walls of politeness, where two souls keep performing love only to evade confronting the truth. That passion expired the day they ceased being strangers. A point arrives when the soul wearies of compliance, not to the other person, but to the falsehood it manufactured to uphold the unupholdable. Modern marriage doesn't perish when love ceases. It perishes when authenticity starts demanding oxygen. Nietzsche named it the revolt of the inner slave. That instant when the will, choked by years of compromise, elects to revert to its natural state, free, erratic, hazardous. Externally, it seems like a crisis. Internally, it is a renaissance. The man who suppressed himself for years to preserve peace starts to perceive the void of his own capitulation. The woman who gave up her autonomy in stability's name starts to feel a hatred she cannot articulate, because that animosity isn't for her partner, but for the tamed version of herself. Modern psychology explains this as reactance. The biological urge that surfaces when we sense our freedom has been constrained. The mind, weary of meeting expectations, rebels, even if that means annihilating what it once constructed. Nietzsche perceived this long before others. The soul that yields its power sickens, and its sickness is named morality. This is why a marriage's end is seldom logical. It is volatile. Every critique, every quiet spell, every frustration, cloaked as love, eventually ignites the field of the familiar. And what ensues is not a separation. It is liberation manifested as war. Stanford University psychologists verified this. Couples who repress the most for harmony's sake are those most prone to experiencing violent detonations eventually. Not from spite, but from saturation. The soul cannot abide perpetual imprisonment. Nietzsche knew that all love demanding subservience contains the very seed of its own insurrection. Because the human was not made to belong, he was made to expand. And when a relationship ceases being a domain for growth and turns into an altar for sacrifice, the will does what it invariably does when caged. It shatters. This is how the most vicious divorces are formed, the partings that leave only wreckage behind. It is not hatred fueling them. It is spiritual survival. Both attempt to execute in the other the frail version they fashioned to appease. And the most unsettling aspect is they are successful. But in that act, they also annihilate themselves. Nietzsche wouldn't have termed it failure. He would have termed it rebirth. Because only one who traverses the inferno can rediscover himself, unmasked. This is why, when it all concludes, what's left is not just emotional wreckage, but a question hanging in the smoke. Was it love, or was it the fear of being alone? And in that quiet after the clamor, When the documents are signed, when the bed is vacant, when routine's echo no longer oppresses, something begins that is tougher than loving, recalling who you were before you loved. Nietzsche distilled it in a phrase that still sears like hot iron: "He who cannot live alone is not free." And perhaps that is why contemporary love fails so frequently. Because most individuals are not seeking a partner. They are seeking a flotation device. And when the device deflates, they find they never learned to swim. When love implodes, not everything is annihilated. What truly collapses is the illusion, and beneath its debris lies something far more precious: the truth. Most people do not find rebirth following divorce. They just swap one dependency for a new one. But a few, those who can confront the void without narcotics, find what Nietzsche termed the birth of the sovereign spirit. That juncture when the individual ceases to find meaning in others and starts to forge it from within. For years, your existence centered on us. Your joy hinged on their tone, your value on their focus, your identity on their proximity. But when that all shatters, what's left is a mirror where a shared reflection once was. And what you see in it is not always comforting. That is where the genuine task starts. Not healing, because healing isn't forgetting, but rebuilding yourself without requesting permission. Nietzsche penned, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And that why after a divorce can't be another person, it must be your own evolution. Modern psychology validates this. Studies on post-traumatic growth reveal that after the most agonizing breakups, those who assume responsibility for their pain without seeking a culprit achieve higher planes of clarity, autonomy, and purpose. Annihilation can be an act of creation if you know which part of you needs to perish. Because divorce isn't just a bond's end, it's the end of the version of you that thought you required someone else to be. And that demise, while agonizing, is the sole passage to true freedom. In this new phase, quietude no longer terrifies you. Solitude ceases to be a penalty and becomes a territory. It is no longer an aching absence, but a presence that clarifies. The past's static recedes, and for the first time, you perceive your own voice. That's when you grasp what Nietzsche intended by the Übermensch, the self-creating man. Not one who rules others, but one who conquers his need to be loved to feel alive. Maturity isn't renouncing love, it is loving without ceding your sovereignty, not offering yourself to be whole, but sharing yourself without splintering, not hunting for refuge, but hunting for a mirror. Authentic love doesn't confine, it magnifies. It doesn't request eternal pledges, only genuine presence. And if you should love again, it will not be to plug a hole, but to journey beside someone who also learned to be alone without shattering. Because Nietzsche's ultimate paradox is this: only the one who has forfeited everything can genuinely love. Because they no longer love to own. They love because they've grasped that nothing is theirs. That is how the charade of dependent love concludes, and something more hazardous and more pure commences. The liberty to love without necessity. And now, knowing this, you cannot love in the same way again, because you have grasped that love isn't upheld by permanence, but by liberty, that nobody can complete you, and that everything you once labeled security was just fear masked as affection. Nietzsche didn't annihilate love, he refined it. He revealed that to love is not to fuse with another, but to risk being yourself before another, without concealing your shadow, without pleading for rescue. Divorce was never a conclusion, it was an initiation. The rite where the version of you that loved from a place of lack perishes, and the being who can love from abundance is born. So if you are here, still upright amid the warm wreckage of a love that has expired, do not perceive it as a loss. Perceive it as the conflagration that uncovered who you truly were beneath the facade. Because real power isn't holding on to what departs. It's not collapsing when it departs. And when you arrive at that point, when you can stare into the void and still stand, Love ceases to be a dungeon and becomes a choice. If you desire to continue descending into this shadow, if you wish to grasp how desire, attachment, and solitude weave within the human psyche, view the other videos on this channel appearing on your screen. Each is a passage to the identical truth. Only those who belong to themselves can love without dread. But before you depart, ask yourself something savage and truthful. Who are you prepared to lose, just to never lose yourself again?